there's going to be this window where people are going to be much more aggressive in their spend, where carriers are going to really start to spend a lot of money back in growth. So that could be on the marketing side, that can be on the investment side, that can be on the sales side, their distribution models, all of those different things, which lead to big opportunity for people in the entire ecosystem to help support that. Welcome back, everyone, to the Insurance Growth Lab. I'm Callan Harrington, and today it's just going to be me. I want to talk a little bit about something that I'm seeing because I think we're coming into a really interesting time, and talk a little bit about what I've experienced this time personally, because I think there's going to be a big opportunity here. So to get a little bit more specific, I think we're going into a period of growth again. I'm not going to go on record yet to say that we're entering a soft market because we don't know. But I will say this, I think most of the stats out there are saying that rates are stabilizing. And of course, this is very dependent on the different sectors and industries and lines of business, but we're seeing some rate stabilization. And one of the things, I saw this at ITC, but I've heard this in a lot of our conversations. Carriers, agencies, insurtechs, it's starting to switch to going back on offense. And I'm not saying that this is a full-blown growth at all costs, which, look, call it what it is. In the carrier world, really never going to be a growth at all costs. But I do see some of that. We're switching back. Our appetites are loosening up a bit, and we're starting to invest in growth. And I think one of the best places that I've ever heard to look in, like as a great leading indicator on this, is to look at what the lead providers are doing and how are they performing in the market. And Coverager had an article the other day, and they talked about some of the bullets from EverQuote's most recent earnings call. And this to me is very telling. Enterprise carrier spend was up 27%. Now, if you followed this at all, over the past couple of years, almost all the lead providers, the carrier spend in buying auto leads, home leads was way down. And a lot of those lead providers were in a lot of trouble because the carriers spend the most money by far when it comes. And, there are some digital agencies that can rival a carrier, but the big carriers are really the ones that spend the most money on media and paid media and leads and all of those different things. So being up 27%, that's a pretty big deal. Separately, when it comes to investment and growth, Nationwide announced that they're going to be investing $1.5 billion in technology through 2028, with $100 million per year dedicated to AI over the next 3 years. Those are two pretty big indicators that we're going back on offense a bit in the insurance space. Again, I'm not going to say we're going into a soft market. I think people are definitely still worried about what's going on, but at the same point, there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. And I saw a lot of this optimism at ITC, and it felt like a lot of funding rounds were happening. That said, if you look at the objective stats, first 3 quarters were relatively flat, and it looked very similar to last year, but I'll be very interested to see Q4 2025 numbers in investment in InsurTech, and then what the numbers look like in Q1 of 2026. So given all this, I think we're going into a window where if people are going back on offense, the people that seize the moment and can achieve significant long-term gains. So what do I mean by that is there's going to be this window where people are going to be much more aggressive in their spend, where carriers are going to really start to spend a lot of money back in growth. So that could be on the marketing side, that can be on the investment side, that can be on the sales side, their distribution models, all of those different things, which lead to big opportunity for people in the entire ecosystem to help support that. And I think that agencies they've had nothing but negative conversations for the most part. Now, negative events can often lead to really prime touch points to build a deeper relationship with your customers, but let's call it what it is. A lot of the service people at agencies have had a rough couple years with the canceled policies, the rate hikes, all the different things. And I'm not saying that those things weren't warranted, but they've had some tough conversations. And now coming out of this, they can focus a lot more on, I don't want to say just growth, because in a hard market, those premiums did go up. So those agencies oftentimes stayed stable or still increased in their revenue. But now they can really grow. They can grow their policy count. They can get out there and market and sell again. And on the insurtech side, similar to what we said before, there's this big opportunity to support those agencies and carriers as they start to look more towards offense again. And so it's a really interesting time. And so with that, in the spirit of the show and actually diving into, campaigns from, my career, as a lot of people know, I've spent the past 15 years in the insurtech space as a sales, marketing, and revenue leader. And so that's what inspired the show. So I want to talk about a story that maybe could serve as an interesting time or an interesting story for this time in particular. So this was back from my Bold Penguin days, and we had this really big mark that we wanted to hit. We wanted to enroll 200 agencies in 30 days into our commercial rating and market access program. Now, that number, that's the subjective number, right? That could mean a lot to somebody. That could mean a little. So I'm going to give you a little bit more color on that here in a minute on why that was a big deal and a very difficult number to hit. And if that number was hit, the people that were on that team were going to get a significant bonus. Now, this is oftentimes a double-edged sword, because one of the biggest mistakes that you can make, and I see this all the time, many people would believe that salespeople in particular are coin operated. And the reality is there's a lot of truth to that. And I will tell you, early in my career, there was a ton of truth to that. I followed the money in almost every single thing I did within my sales career. It wasn't until later that other things became as important or more important. But that wasn't the absolute only thing. And oftentimes what will happen is, and I will tell you, as a revenue leader, I have personally been guilty of this. You'll put an astronomical payout tied to a goal, and then you'll put some ridiculous number that needs to be hit to hit that. So yeah, you're going to push really hard to hit that goal if you think that's reasonable, if you think that's actually attainable. If you don't, it doesn't matter if it's the best salesperson in the world, that number's too high, it's going to have the reverse effect. You're not even going to care. You're not going to work harder. You're not going to even try to get that. And so it is kind of a tricky balance to pick that right number, to really be a stretch. So if you're going to put a big number and a big payout on that, well, then that's got to be a stretch goal, but it has to be something that you look at and you just don't feel like that's going to be impossible. Like this, I think another good example of this, a parallel example of this is if you're stepping up to the bench press and there's 1,000 pounds on there, you're not going to get that motivated. It doesn't matter what somebody says in order for you to accomplish that. You're not going to accomplish that feat. Or maybe there's one person in the world that possibly can, and probably not, right? That's a super high number, and it's no different than setting a number that's way, 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 way too high to hit. But that doesn't mean you can't put a stretch goal. Let's dive into the background of this a little bit. Let's talk about the product. This product at that time, and this was years ago, this was a really new product. And it was a new product within the market, not market access. This is when a lot of people were adding market access to almost everything that they did. But the actual product itself, the commercial lines rating platform, was pretty new. Now, that being said, a number of players got into this at the exact same time. And it was critical for us as a company. We had shown amazing traction, and we really did a really good job on the enterprise side. But on the SMB side, so those Main Street middle market agencies, we really needed to elevate what we were doing in that regard, because there were a ton of other people that were getting into this. And I would tell you internally, we were all thinking if Vertafore or Applied gets into this, we could be in trouble. And so we needed to make a statement, and it was really important to get those numbers. So to put this into context, so there's 200 agencies that we wanted to enroll on this. That was our goal. At this point, we probably had sold 10 to 15 of these. So not a lot. Now, I had been the leader of the agency sales, and so I knew this was going to be really difficult. But that said, I thought we had an outside chance at it. And we would have to do something really unique, really special in order to hit that. But I did think that we could do that. Oh, and then on top of that, that 30 days, that was December. And so last month of the year, we had to fight against time with the holidays. That was daunting. Now, here's a dirty little secret if you've worked with agency distribution for a very long time. If you support agencies, you know this, especially if you've had any type of product that serves agencies. November and December, if you're coming from the outside in, you often think, oh man, we've got the holidays in November, we got the holidays in December, fighting with all of the holiday parties and everything else. This is like, we're going to chalk these months up. But if you've done this for any amount of time, you know that those first couple of weeks in November and those first couple of weeks in December are by far the best weeks of the year that end up being the best months of the year. So if you're new to this, do not rule out November and December. Those are important. I would argue they're so important that ramping up in September and October to really knock the cover off the ball in November and December is really, really important. And that's why you see a lot of the conferences set up around that time. All right. So still, nonetheless, we're kicking off this major initiative. We only sold 10 to 15 a day. We got to hit 200 of these, and we all have to do this in December. Now, here's why December was interesting. We decided that it's going to be an all hands on deck. The blitz was going to involve the sales reps on the SMB side that were selling this, the sales reps on the enterprise side, and anybody that was involved in leadership were all going to be totally focused on selling this SMB product. So you're going to deprioritize what we were doing on an enterprise perspective and focus on this SMB product. And you're hearing this, and if you've been in any type of sales leadership or have sold or whatever that might be for any amount of time, this went to start out about exactly how you would have thought it would. And I don't know that it ever really changed, but we're tripping all over each other. We're stepping on each other's toes. And so you had heard Nick Olubitsky that was just on the podcast, which I'd highly recommend listening to his episode if you want to get a feel for how is AI and RevOps impacting what's going on in go-to-market right now. But we had worked together for years, and we were together at Bold Penguin. So any process that we put in place was just totally thrown out the window. And I just remember I'm frustrated. I've got a ton of anxiety because I'm like, this is going to blow up in our faces, because I am somebody that's very much, we're going to put in scalable processes. We're going to hit those processes. We're going to measure that. We're going to be very predictable about what we're doing. And what we decided to do here was the exact opposite. So I wasn't that happy about it. And then something changed. Because we had this big overall team goal, and people started closing these deals. And man, did the team rally around each other. Everybody was helping each other out. Everybody was getting each other's backs. They're pushing each other, supporting each other. And I just would have never guessed that we would have had a push like that. One of the interesting things about this too, I found was, sometimes you often will have a decent size SMB team, let's just say 10, 20, 30 SMB reps, and it's so crystal clear who's really good and who's not. And on the enterprise side, sometimes, in a startup, it's hard to say who's really good and who's not. Yes, you have the actual numbers, right? But sometimes enterprise numbers can get skewed because one person can bring in a deal worth 10 million where somebody else got 5 deals worth $1 million. And I'm saying some random numbers here, but and so you think, oh man, the person that did 10 million in production versus the person that did 5 million in production is way better. Well, maybe. And you never really know how that deal came across, right? And anybody doesn't say that there's not some amount of luck for some of those mega deals. There is. It's just the reality. And so you don't know, who does have kind of that, either that natural skill set or really hone their craft, or who's good. And man, it opened my eyes when everybody was doing the same thing and seeing how they operated. And I can't tell you how many people from that team I just had the utmost respect for. So anybody that who I'm talking about on that Bold Penguin sales team during this time. Man, I just absolute killers. And I've got a ton of respect for that team. And so we ended up hitting that goal. And I just I knew the number was potentially attainable, but how that started out with literally the whole team cold calling. This is largely cold calling. I should also state that I'm not saying there was marketing support, right? And we had air cover from that regard. But man, this was roll up your sleeves, cold calling, brute force, like true brute force, in order to do all this. And when we hit the mark, it was getting pretty close to literally getting very close to the end of the year. We had a ridiculous pipeline, but pipeline means nothing. You got to get the deals in the door in order to hit this. And so we did. We hit it with a couple of days to spare. But the interesting thing was we ended up doing like another 80, 90 more before we wrapped up the year. So we were just shy of 300 agencies. And we hit that bonus. And I got to tell you, I just changed my whole viewpoint on, I think I could get personally so overly caught up in, again, I talked about earlier, that scalability and making sure that we had this exact process in place and we could put fuel in this process and get the end result, but we can't do anything else on that. That was very much my mindset. And I'm still probably 80% of the way there. But sometimes, and Paul Graham, a Y Combinator, had said this best, sometimes you just need to do things that don't scale. And I actually don't think that applies to just startups. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. But one of the things is I thought this was going to, in the beginning, have this detrimental long-term impact. It's like, we're never going to be able to clean all this up. And, it's people, or we're going to upset our entire agency force because we called them pretty hard. But we did. We cleaned it up. And everybody came together as a team, and it was a pretty incredible time to go through that. It was a really cool time together, and it brought us closer to a team and all the things that you can think of. And I think there is an opportunity as we go into this window. If you think about some of the challenges that these past couple years have created, carriers are going to need to repair the relationships with their agents. And look, I think I would say most people probably, now I can't say that for every agency. I don't know if every agency feels that carriers did exactly what they needed to do, but the reality is cost of claims was going up. Inflation, you name it. It was just an absolute perfect storm. So obviously consumers are upset because every year you look at your insurance bill the next year and it's set to renew, and it's just significantly bigger. That's tough, right? And I talked about it earlier. Agents, they're in a state of constantly having to deliver bad news. And I'm not saying, so many great agents found silver linings in this, and set them up for success, even more so as we come out of this. But I think for those carriers that can use this window to mend that relationship with those agencies, build even deeper, support those agencies even more, that's a huge opportunity, right? And if everybody's going to be growing again, and I'm not saying that's necessarily going to be the case, but I'm hearing, anecdotally, a lot of people are trying to push back into this growth mode. And if that's the case, you're going to have to do some things that are just outside of the norm. And I'll add InsurTechs to this as well. InsurTechs, if Nationwide comes out, as I mentioned, and says we're going to be investing $1.5 billion in technology over the next couple of years, you better believe that everybody's going to be fighting for that business. And that's Nationwide stated it publicly. You can guarantee that all these other major carriers are going to be thinking about, let me take that back. It doesn't need to be major carriers. You can pretty much guarantee all the majors, all the nationals, all the regionals, all the super regionals, all of them are going to be out there thinking about AI and how can they invest in that, in technology in general. And so I think everybody within the space right now is in this window, and you're going to have some opportunities to really capture market, because these things just don't happen very often. And taking that short-term risk and doing some things that don't scale can have that opportunity to have a very long-term positive outlook. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that's not a risk. It is possible that you can do these things that don't scale and it can hurt. But there's always a risk. Anybody is trying to get a massive reward, there's going to be some sort of risk involved with that. And I truly believe that those that take advantage of that and those that pull some of these things that don't scale and create this experience and create these long-term things, that's going to really, 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 really pay off. So as we're heading to wrap this up, as we're heading this into 2026, and you're planning some of these things and you're thinking about your strategy going into 2026, I would just say spend a little time thinking about those things that what can you do that is just totally outside of the box? What can you do that if you had unlimited resources, this is what you do? And could you do that for a shorter period of time or whatever that may be? Just something to think about. If nothing else, it's worth the exercise to go through that, even if you don't do it. You may go through that and say, it's not worth it. We're growing. We feel confident about what we're doing. So be it. But some people only want to swing for the fences and have a high risk tolerance and want to give that a shot. Either way, great exercise to do. I'm bringing this thing to an actual close here and getting this thing wrapped up. If you like this episode, you could find me on LinkedIn to let me know. If you hate this episode, tell your enemies. We'll take their views too. And if you really want to support the show, subscribe to us on YouTube. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every time you do, it is very much appreciated. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see everybody next week.